I met Rhonda when we were in high school, actually. And I met her when we were freshmen, and then didn't start dating until we were seniors. But after college, we both got married, decided we'd wait a few years to have kids, had our daughter in '88, and then Michael was born in '95. So, yeah, there's the answer. Yes.
Describe the two of them.
So Rhonda was rather vivacious. She went through college in 3 years. She graduated valedictorian of her high school and of our high school, and decided that she really wanted to get through college as quickly as she could. So she took summer classes and just kept going year round. And got through in 3 years and became a CPA. And when we lived in Indianapolis, and then when we moved to Kansas City, she ended up at the Hallmark's tax division, and really thrived there. Loved life, loved her kids, loved spending time just with the family, and doing things that brought peace to our lives. Michael was a really cute little boy who actually never got to the point where he could talk. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor when he was 6 months old, and so that started a series of surgeries and treatments over the next 2 years before he passed away. That was rather obviously emotional. But also taught us a great deal about life and living and love. 30 days after Michael was diagnosed with his brain tumor, Rhonda was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so they ended up going through chemo and radiation at the same time. It was a very trying period, obviously, in our family's life from '95 to '98. Michael passed away in April of '97, and Rhonda died in August of '98. In fact, this past Saturday would have been Michael's 21st birthday, which is pretty amazing to think of what he would have been like at age 21. I think many people have a lot of bad things happen to them, and you're defined by what you've gone through, and that defines your character. And I'm a big believer that you don't know how strong you are until strong is your only option. And there were many times Rhonda and I would be cooking dinner, or just standing in the kitchen, and we'd look at each other and ask each other if we thought we were still sane, because at one point Michael was on 30 different medications a day. We were taking the specific gravity of his urine to understand if he needed another dose of DDAVP, because he had lost the ability to concentrate his urine, and he would have dehydrated. And so it's this extraordinarily complex set of circumstances. And I think, much like what happens to soldiers, when they're on the front line, you're in the moment. The difference is you're in the moment for many years, 24 hours a day. And you don't really have a choice. What is your choice? You're going to walk away from that? Of course not. My daughter's 5, 6 years old. My wife's 36, 37. It's like you're going to, come closer. Now, the team at Children's Mercy will tell you that most marriages do not make it through something like this. I think the statistic was around 75% of marriages fail because of situations like this. Obviously, both Michael and Rhonda died, and you go through something like that, and you have a choice. And it's a little bit trite to say, but you have a choice of you're either bitter or better. And I'm at peace with what happened. And I grew from it, and people around me grew from it. Catherine, my daughter, certainly grew from it and is a much more powerful and strong individual. I think that's You know, death and the process of dying is always sad, but it's part of life also. So I don't think you can look at it in a vacuum and just wallow in your misery. It's you know, we're here to enjoy the time that we have. So, you know, acknowledge, you know, what that time was like, honor their memory, and keep moving. You know, it was really interesting. When Michael was diagnosed, he was too young. The tumor Michael had, I will get to that question, the tumor Michael had, if he had been 5 years old, would have been far more treatable than at 6 months. And the physicians were worried that using the kind of radiation they needed to would have severely damaged his brain. And so, you know, and we have friends who, you know, we met through Children's Mercy, whose children did have this pilocytic, let's see, what was it, a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma. So the type of tumor Michael had was not easily treatable with radiation at his age. I always felt Michael's situation was more dire than Rhonda's situation. I mean, there's plenty of statistics about women and breast cancer, and certainly whatever the number was at the time, you know, 9 out of 100 women will get breast cancer, and out of that, 1 will, you know, likely die from it. So the statistical odds of Rhonda dying from breast cancer to me seemed far, far less than Michael. And I think, you know, the conversations we had, she was always of the mindset that the cancer was going to kill both of them. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. Now, certainly I'm much more of an optimist than many, but when Michael died, shortly thereafter, you know, Rhonda's cancer came back again, a second time, and so she had a double mastectomy at that time, and then 6 months, 7 months later, it went from not being present at all to being stage 4, and in 6 months she died. So the conversations that we had along the way were, you know, will this get both of them, you know, and what would it be like if it did? We had one, after she was diagnosed and after we knew she was terminal, we had one extremely emotional conversation, and both of us laughed at the end and said, okay, we can't do that anymore because it's way too hard to talk about that. But, you know, in life, and I don't know if this is true with all parents, but certainly in our life, I was far closer to Catherine, and Rhonda was far closer to Michael. And so I remember one of the things we talked about in that conversation was, you know, Rhonda assuring me that Catherine and I would be fine because of how close we were in our relationship. And that meant a lot because, you know, I wanted that affirmation from her that, you know, she wasn't going to be here to help raise, you know, our 6-year-old daughter. That was going to be a challenge. And so I was glad I had that affirmation. I wasn't particularly looking forward to being a single parent, which is why I'm really thrilled that I met Julie when I did and got married, and Julie, you know, accepted Catherine as her own, and Catherine accepted Julie, and so that was her second mom, you know, for the last, whatever it is now, 17 years, 16 years. But yeah, we had those conversations. But both Rhonda and I, you know, rarely looked backwards. You know, when she was diagnosed as terminal in March or January of '98, I don't know who suggested that we work on our estate plans, but I'm really glad whoever suggested that did. And we called our attorneys at Lathrop and Gage, and Jim Betterman came out to the house, and we mapped everything out. And we put everything in order, you know, for the trusts, and updated our wills. And subsequently, I've done that a number of times, you know, in the last, you know, 20 years. But that was a key pivot point And again, a tough conversation is an acknowledgement of, all right, well, this isn't going to end well, so let's figure out what we need to do to make sure that it goes forward well. We put healthcare directives in place, and that's also an emotional topic to discuss. But you get to a point where you've had all these other decisions to make in the last 3 years. These get somewhat easier when you realize that this is inevitable. I think what's harder for people is when there is no crisis, and you have to say, all right, we should probably put a healthcare directive together. We need to talk about trusts and wills and beneficiaries, and I think people hesitate to do that because they don't see the need. I mean, in many ways, I was fortunate, very fortunate, that I got to say goodbye over a long period of time. I've often talked to people who have lost a child or a spouse in a car accident or in some other, or just a heart attack, and they didn't get to say goodbye. I had plenty of time to say goodbye, and that probably helped me along this path more than anything. So as we were thinking about healthcare directives and power of attorney discussions, estate planning, that just seemed like a natural progression at this point in the process. In the last few days, when we brought in hospice, which that was another interesting decision. Not everyone in the family really wanted to acknowledge that it was time, I think, to bring in hospice, and I think that happens a lot because it's got this stigma of, well, we're near death. It's like, well, yes, we are, and let's make sure that our family member and the family is most comfortable and prepared, to handle the death that's coming. But yeah, there was probably the last 48 to 36 hours, or 36 to 48 hours, where Rhonda was really not conscious, and so it was really up to me to administer, pain-killing drugs and to talk to the hospice workers and figure out what to do. I think all the conversations you have, when you have time to understand what's happening, all the conversations you have prepare you to make the decisions and have the conversations that you need to have. So if you reach a level of emotional stability that most people don't believe they would reach, but you do reach it, where you have the clarity to make decisions based on the wishes of your loved one and the conversations that you've had. And so those decisions, when you know that they're out there, they're just kind of hanging out there. And all at once, it's like, all right, this one just got presented. And based on the conversations we've had, I'm prepared to execute that decision. And it sounds a little bit formulaic, but it's not. It's very organic in how that happens, because there's nothing predictable about what's going to happen. It's just, if you've had these conversations and you understand what the options are, then you're more prepared to make those decisions. I think about the people who have to make decisions regarding unplugging a respirator, when there's no advance directive, there's been no conversation. Those are gut-wrenching. I can't even imagine what that must be like, to have not had that conversation. To acknowledge the fact that you're going to live is to acknowledge the fact that you're going to die. And we all hope that we die well. Because of what happened, I live my life expecting another shoe to fall at any moment. So I've gone through enough pain in that way that I look at life now and I say, I'm far more grateful for every day that I'm here. And I will never be surprised when something bad happens, because I expect it to happen every day. And there are many days I wish I didn't feel that way. But in one respect, it makes me enjoy my life far more, because I'm not I don't live in fear. I just live in anticipation that something bad is going to happen. That's a totally different thing. Something bad will happen, but that's not fear. That's just not expected, to happen at that moment. But it's going to happen. And, I hope that my family and my associates and my friends, that I have communicated my wishes, and that that people understand that I was totally prepared financially and emotionally for whatever happened. When we found out Rhonda was pregnant with Catherine, and that would have been in '88, we set an appointment with a pediatrician, and it was Jeff Waters at Pediatric Associates, which I find most of the city has gone to Jeff Waters as their pediatrician. And so we were waiting in the exam room, and Jeff came in, and he was visibly shaken. And he's talking to us, and he said, I just had to deliver some bad news to another family. And he goes, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit disheveled. And I never forgot that. And then the way Michael was diagnosed, so fast forward from '88 to '95, the way Michael was diagnosed is he'd not been feeling well. Again, he's 6 months old, and he hadn't been finishing all of his formula at daycare, and it looked like he'd lost a little weight. So we took him to Pediatric Associates, and one of the physicians on the weekend, it was a Sunday, and he examined him, and he said, he goes, I think he's just got a rhinovirus, a little cold, but how long has his left eye been twitching? And Rhonda and I looked at Michael, and his left eye was just kind of vibrating a little bit. And we're like, we hadn't noticed it. He goes, well, let's just, check him into St. Luke's and get a CAT scan. And so they did. And of course, that's a tremendously angst-ridden period. And the next morning, after the CAT scan, Jeff Waters came in, and again, I'm gonna cry thinking about it. He had to give us the news again that he'd shared with another family 8 years earlier or 7 years earlier. And I think that had to be the toughest moment. And when I look back on it, it's that moment where all hopes and dreams get rattled. And you don't know for sure, obviously, at that point, is Michael going to die? Is the tumor operable? But all right, you got an infant that weighs 19 pounds. It's like, it can't be good to have a brain tumor when you're 6 months old. And so I think that was probably the toughest moment. And then closely followed by, Michael's first craniotomy. I think that was also tough to see him, in ICU, wrapped up in a big bandage and, unresponsive. But part of that pain too, it's not so much, it's certainly the hopes and dreams that as a parent you have for your child have been dashed, but it's also the poor bastard of a doctor who has to come in and say, your son has a brain tumor. I wouldn't do that job for anything. And that's just certainly 99 out of 100 times they don't have to deliver that kind of news. But damn, when they have to deliver that news. I mean, you've just exploded every paradigm a parent ever had about what's it going to be like to be a parent. And then when Michael's sick, you're like, well, he may live, but he's going to be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So what's that going to be like? So there's this myriad of emotions and hopes and dreams that are dashed in an instant. And of course, the whole night before, you're trying to sleep, and you can't sleep because you're like, what are we dealing with here? Is it kidney disease? Is it liver disease? Is he going to need a liver transplant? Why is he losing weight? It can't be good that his eye is twitching. And what it was the tumor was pressing on the optic nerve. And the doctor who saw that, he said, I've only seen 2 others in his 50 years of treating, but he knew what it was, or at least he had a good idea what it was. When you have an infant with a brain tumor, it kind of supersedes everything. And it did, I think it did for Rhonda too. I don't think Rhonda took her breast cancer terribly seriously. I mean, it was a 2-centimeter tumor in the upper left breast tissue. It's like, all right, take it out. There were no nodes positive. There'd been no metastasizing of the tumor. And so, metastasis, that's the word I'm looking for. And so she didn't think, nor did I, that, it's like a lot of women have breast cancer. Now, the fact that she was premenopausal was a little bit of a concern, and the fact that she had a history of breast cancer in her family. But her aunt had had breast cancer 40 years earlier and was still alive and survived. So there was always hope, and I think that's the thing, that when people go through these kinds of tragedies, hope is your only option. Hope and prayer. And so certainly, to have both of them go through at the same time, I remember asking our doctors at Children's Mercy if they'd ever witnessed that, and they had not. And I also remember asking if they thought there was any correlation between Michael's tumor and Rhonda's tumor, and of course their answer is, well, there's such a small sample size we would never know if there is. But yeah, it was certainly it exacerbated the challenge of treating Michael, because there were a number of times that they would get chemo on the same day. It's like, okay, well, where do I go? Do I go with Rhonda or do I go with Michael? And they're not at the same hospital, obviously. And so her parents would go with her, and I would go with Michael, and we'd meet back in the middle. I'm a better person, and my daughter is a better person, and a number of people that went through it with us are better people because of it. I think it's I don't think you can go through something like that without being changed. So I think there is a silver lining there. It's that comment I made earlier about you don't know how strong you are until strong is your only option. I am far stronger as a person today than I was prior to 1995. I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but I think lots of people have tragedy in their lives, and that can be defining moments on how they move forward and how they choose to move forward. And it is a choice. Not everyone makes it. A lot of people never get by the hit that they take by the loss of a loved one. And I think that's probably the hardest part. Other silver linings, when Michael died, unexpectedly, we got checks from lots of people. And I think it was close to $10,000 of just gifts of checks. And Rhonda and I weren't exactly sure what to do with that. And so we talked to the development office at Mercy and decided to create a scholarship for nurses at Children's Mercy. And the first year we gave away a couple scholarships, and the program wasn't very big. I think there may have been 12 or 15 nurses the first year, and this would have been May of 98. And we've been doing it now since 98, so whatever that is, 18 years. And a few years ago, Julie and I decided to create an endowed scholarship for nursing so that it will go on in perpetuity, so long after we're gone. And the reason we did it was because we were in Children's Mercy. There was one period in the summer of 96 that we were there for 97 days straight, and 24 hours a day. And we just took shifts and would sleep, eat, in the room with Michael. And what we found was doctors come and go, but the nurses are the constant that not only care for the patient, but care for the family. and answer the questions that need answered when the doctors are not there. And so we made a decision to help nurses continue their education as long as Children's Mercy and their foundation exists. And I think we'll continue to add money to that and help that grow. So I think that is most certainly a silver lining that came out of this. I was always a little scared of Children's Mercy. Rhonda had a friend who had a baby who, was a preemie and had to go to Children's Mercy, and we went to visit, and the whole place scared me to death. And I think a lot of parents, are anxious about, being admitted to Children's Mercy. And I wish that weren't true, but because it's an extraordinary level of care. And, having the opportunity to see that firsthand and then having the opportunity to help nurses continue their education is a huge silver lining of this process, of what happened. When Julie and I were dating, one of the conversations we had that was rather important was, what happens if something bad happens? And that was an interesting conversation. I started to say fun. It wasn't fun. It was just really interesting. It was emotional and meaningful. Because going through that with Rhonda as my partner, again, I assumed that kind of bad thing would happen again. And I wanted to be sure the person that I was contemplating marrying and having in my life and helping raise Catherine had the courage to do that. So that was a good conversation, and we both walked away from it feeling that we would be good partners in that kind of situation. Unfortunately, we've not faced anything nearly that drastic. Certainly we've had plenty of challenges, like every couple does, but it's not. It's that metal that's there that holds a relationship together. It also did spur conversations about what should we do regarding estate planning, what should we do regarding healthcare directives, and who should be the executors of the estate. And we put that together shortly after we were married, and that has worked out very well. And those conversations led to us talking to our parents about the same things. Again, I just don't think a lot of people think about the importance of getting that in order, before you absolutely have to have it in order. We were fortunate in a timing perspective, that Rhonda and I had the time to do that before she died. And, a lot of people end up in probate because they didn't think it through, they didn't take time, they didn't understand the consequences. And maybe the estate isn't big, but still, don't put yourself through that kind of ringer if you don't have to. And so maybe you spend a couple $1,000s getting an attorney to draw these documents up. When Catherine went to work after she graduated college, I think it was just a year or so ago, she got her estate plan in place at age 25 or 26. But she kind of understands the reason to do that. She's seen it firsthand. Even though she was, relatively young, she understood that this is important and bad things do happen, and be prepared for them. I think there's a song with this title. I think we live in a world of illusion. I think our minds are very powerful at blocking reality, and that we can easily fall into the mindset of, well, that'll happen someday, or I'll do that later, or yes, but we've got to go to this family event next week, and I want to make sure we're prepared. There's always a reason not to do it. But I would say that, you know, this is an opportunity to live outside of reasons, you know, and say, all right, I understand that, you know, I have many things I'd rather do, but sooner or later we're all going to die. And you're not doing this for yourself, you're doing it for everyone around you, to make their lives easier, so that they're fully informed about your wishes and your decisions. And you don't want to make them guess. You don't want to put that kind of burden on them. They're going to have plenty of burden by losing you anyway, you know, emotionally. Let's not put the financial burden. Let's not put, you know, additional emotional burden. Let's not toss in the thoughts and bickerings of siblings, and or aunts or uncles or anyone else that may think they have a stake in the estate. It's like, just be clear. I think people who have gone through it have a better idea, and maybe people who get old enough to realize that they are going to die, I think they understand more closely. But we don't know when we're going to die. We just don't know. And it seems like, well, it's stating the obvious. We don't know when we're going to die. Therefore, you have to be prepared so that you lessen the burden on the people who are living. I mean, our estate at the time was not huge. You know, there was life insurance and things like that. And I don't remember if we would have like fallen into a different tax bracket or if the estate would have been taxed differently. I don't recall that. I do recall that I felt better knowing everything was in order. And I was ignorant enough prior to having the conversation that I had no idea what the challenges could be if I had not moved forward with, you know, putting the estate plan in place. And I think, again, that's, what was I, 37? No, 38. No, 37. I was 37 years old when we did this. And there's no way in the world I would have known. You know, I mean, I grew up on a farm in Illinois. It's like, you had a will, and that's, if you had a will, that was great. But what I learned in this process is a will means nothing. I mean, it's still going to go to court. It can still be contested. You know, if you don't have trusts in place, and those can certainly be contested too, but they're pretty rock solid. If you don't have an advance directive in place and a healthcare directive in place and identified who your beneficiaries are, who the executor of your estate is going to be, it just simplifies everything. There's no way I would have known of the importance of doing that. So if you're a parent, not only should you be thinking about this for yourself, you should be thinking about it for your kids, because they don't understand the importance of it either. And if you're a child who has parents who are still living who have not done this, you know, you really have to work up the courage to have this conversation. Because it's not just about, do we need to buy plots, or are we going to be cremated, or, you know, what kind of casket do I want? I mean, great, awesome. The dearly deceased isn't going to be there to see that anyway. So it's how do you make this easier on yourself? And I think as Julie and I had conversations with our parents about this, you know, well, certainly my parents saw what it was like, you know, for me to go through this. So, you know, when I approached them and I said, where are you guys at on your estate planning? Well, we have wills. I'm like, that's not going to cut it. I said, you know, and my dad was funny. He's like, oh, you three can just fight it out. I'm like, no. We're not going to fight it out. You figure out how you want to do it and get it done. And so they did. And it took them maybe 6 months to say, all right, let's have the conversations and get it put to bed. And Julie's had the same conversations with her parents. Rhonda's parents have put all of their estate plans in place. You know, Catherine is their only grandchild, and so all of that's laid out so that the survivors don't have to think about it. if nothing else, you want the survivors to not damage their relationships fighting over an estate. Just make it clear. There were 2 times when Michael was sick that we signed DNRs, do not resuscitate. And then we rescinded both of those. And part of that was because he kept living. And there were 2 times when we didn't think he was going to live. So those are very hard decisions to make. When you're making a decision for a loved one regarding a DNR, it's akin to saying, all right, let's also bring in hospice. Although not all hospice situations are end-of-life situations. DNR is, it's pretty clear. If there's a do not resuscitate, that's a major life decision you are making. And at Mercy, at least as I recall, there was a sheet of paper right above the head of the bed that had DNR on it. So every day you looked at that. That was really challenging because you're saying, all right, I'm not going to allow these medical professionals to resuscitate my child in the event he quits breathing. That's probably one of the hardest decisions I think we made, the 2 times that we made it. And you never know if you're making the right decision. Even when you rescind the DNR, you don't know if you're making the right decision. So the extreme measures, certainly having the advance directive is there. And I think having it for an adult is very different than having it for a child. There's nothing about these situations that is simple emotionally. They're all very tough, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching decisions. I've just found that it's far better to think them through up front than to wait until you're in the middle of a crisis and then try to have a clear enough mind to think it through. I don't think that's possible. I think you have to have had someone ask you these key questions, preferably a legal professional who is helping you put these directives together, so that you have truly thought through, what are the challenges? What kind of situation am I going to be in where I have to make these decisions? And I think that's part of why we're doing what we're doing here. It's like people have to understand that you don't want to be making these decisions in a crisis, especially a drastic measure decision of, do you resuscitate? Do you give them a shot of epinephrine to try to bring them back? It's like, how much pain do you want to put your loved one through? I think that's a thought and a conversation you need to have as early as you possibly can, well before that person is sick. People ask me often, how did we get through it? I had a lot of friends, and we had a very strong church community that brought us 3 meals a day to Children's Mercy when we were there. People did amazing things. My mom started selling blue ribbons in my hometown in Illinois, to raise money. And we didn't need the money. We were fortunate. We had very good health insurance, but people just wanted to do something. And I think that's, you look at today, there's care pages, and it's how you communicate when you have a chronic or serious illness. And I just think, people that enter this kind of situation are going to learn so much, and I wish there was a way that they could be aware of what was going to happen. And I think what you guys are doing with this project and why this matters so much is, just a small amount of planning will prevent so much angst and anticipation of bad. If they just do a little bit of planning, they'll be far better prepared for whatever situation comes, whether it's life and death or just, well, it will be life and death, but whether it's life or death, they'll be better prepared.